Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the September 24th, 2021 meeting of the Rural Resilience and Adaptation Subcommittee of the Vermont Climate Council. Catherine will not be joining us. She's at a two-day offsite meeting. So why don't we take a quick look at our agenda. So today, as a reminder, we're really focusing in on actions that were just sent out. An updated spreadsheet was sent out, I think yesterday or maybe the day before, Marianne. So we'll be focusing a lot of our time on that. So we have the review of the rural resilience pathways, strategies, and actions matrices, really meant to do any final revisions before they need to go to in front of the Climate Council, although the Climate Council already has them. So we can't really do large scale changes, but just making sure, especially for the presentation that we have to give on Tuesday, if there's anything specifically that we want to talk about. So we'll get into that. And then we'll be doing a review of the draft presentation for the Climate Council, and as well as an update on the prioritization framework, equity screening tool, and land use coordination. Jane will be joining us a little bit later to be able to give that. And then the process for prioritizing subcommittee actions in the next meetings. So that's really us discussing what our process should be, and making sure that I'm not too far off base with the process that's already been determined. And then we'll have some public comment. Again, just as a reminder for members of the public, we do welcome your input throughout the meeting. Just give us a heads up that you'd like to make a comment. And then we'll adjourn. Are there any changes or clarifications needed on the agenda or the minutes from the September 17th meeting that are posted in it? Alrighty. Okay, so we can get right into it. I think, does everybody have the spreadsheet that Marianne sent? I only asked that to just make sure to have that up. I'd rather not share my screen, just so that we can have a discussion about this, if that's okay with everybody. If it's easier for me to share my screen, then I will, but it's a pretty hefty spreadsheet.
Well, Erica, I think I'm happy to walk through what I was hoping we could do, and it may not take too much time, is if you all open the link that I put in the chat, that's the link to the calendar event. There are two, in addition to the agenda, two documents saved there. The workbook is the updated version that I sent out that will open up a download link for you all. And then there's a Word document called Summary of Changes. And that's where I tracked any comments that folks sent in that resulted in a change to an action, or moving an action, or splitting an action. I tracked those changes. And at the end of that Word document is a short table with some unresolved comments that I didn't feel comfortable resolving that I'd like to talk through with you all. So I think, sorry, I didn't really clarify this when we put the agenda together. I think we don't have to go through the spreadsheet unless you want to, but I agree that it's hefty and not great to do that in person, but or in a meeting.
Well, what would be helpful, actually, so in the presentation that we have to give, there's, I mean, we're going to go through like each strategy of the actions, see if there's any comments from folks. There's some of the strategies that have a lot of actions associated with them. What you folks were asking us to do is highlight any that may need some additional discussion, or just may need to be highlighted. If we don't need to do that, Marianne, if we're just going to kind of walk through like what the overall direction of the group was when we're doing that presentation, then I won't have us raise those. But in the presentation, it asks us, there's a lot of actions, raise a few of them that need more discussion. So I thought maybe we could just walk through those today that folks think that we need guidance from the council on.
Yeah, I think I can give you all guidance on what, yes, you're on the right track with the presentation. I do think that will take some time to walk through. I think you should maybe try and consolidate so you don't have just one strategy per slide, but maybe two strategies per slide with just an action underneath that's either illustrative of the strategy is something that maybe seems a bit more controversial, or things that we as a subcommittee are hoping to push up to the council that we think might need some additional discussion, or to give the council a heads up and say, hey, this is something we're thinking about. We want to flag it for you all now. I was hoping we could do that after we just go through the unresolved comments, because I have to leave early and I feel comfortable that you all can take that on. Whereas if we need to make changes to some comments in the spreadsheet, I'd like to do that while I'm here, if that makes sense.
Okie dokie.
Okay.
So, so what Marion was talking about was the summary of changes to actions link that's in there, and I will share my screen for that. Okay.
While we're waiting, thanks, Marion, for housekeeping. I know that was not a fun chore.
Oh, it was fine. Thanks to everyone that provided comments. They were really helpful and clear, and I think clarified a lot of the questions that we had. I think just to note that it's been very clear to the council, and this has been outlined for them a number of times, that the spreadsheet that we shared with them, the full spreadsheet, so that they'll have a chance to review it before Tuesday, is still in draft form, and that the subcommittees are still going to be working on refining the actions. I think that will be pretty obvious, because as much detail as I got and comments as I got on actions, there are still some that I think need to be built out more or clarified. There are a number that we need to make sure that we're having conversations with the Ag and Ecosystem Subcommittee about. So it's very clear that they're still in draft form, and the subcommittee is aware of that, but the folks that provided comments did a really great job clarifying. So Eric, I don't know if you want me to walk through this. I would just scroll down. Yeah. So folks can see I organized it by pathway. There are a couple that are highlighted that I did just want to talk about. It's not unresolved, but it's sort of a question, especially from Catherine, and then Chris and Bronwyn both provided comments on this one, and we can just start going through those. So this was really a question both from Catherine and Bronwyn about, like, do we really need this, particularly around sugaring season? I think that's something I'd like to talk about with the subcommittee. It's specifically called out in the Global Warming Solutions Act that we need to address threats posed to the shorter sugaring seasons and less than uncertain snowfall, but it is a little weird that it just calls out those 2 or 3 particular ones. I think Bronwyn suggested some potential changes or combining it with other actions, but I wanted to have a discussion with the group about whether we think this one should stay this way, or if we want to consider consolidating it. But again, it's called out specifically in the act, so I didn't feel comfortable removing it directly. And the left-hand column is what it was before. The right-hand column is Catherine provided an update to it. So it was changing to identify and develop necessary programs, understanding that we may not know what those programs are yet.
I mean, I think it fits in the overall vulnerability assessment. But I don't know if certain legislators are going to be looking for this thing in particular. So we just need to be prepared to say, this is where it fits.
Yeah, and that was, I think, Bronwyn and Chris's suggestion, is that there's a revised action that talks about a toolkit for vulnerability assessments and threat assessments generally, and that this could fit in there. But I don't know if it would be called out specifically if we folded it into that particular action. So it's, maybe a question for counselors, especially about whether you would feel comfortable doing that if legislators were looking at this and saying you didn't, specifically call out the sugaring season. I will say too, we had a public engagement event last night in Island Pond, and a number of folks identified the sugaring season as one way that climate change is impacting them directly.
I think, the other pieces in here about drought and less or uncertain snowfall are especially really important, because not only because they're called out in the act, but maybe this could actually be revised to say assess whether programs that address other hazards posed by climate change, such as drought, less or uncertain snowfall, and shortened sugaring seasons, are adequate to address the changing landscape or changing climate. I wonder if it's an assessment and then a change versus create new programs right out the bat.
I mean, I think it's similar to what we were saying is, a vulnerability assessment that's going to identify what your actions are going to need to be. And they're going to be different, I think, depending on the community.
I mean, and so like has been identified, we do have strategies related to vulnerability assessments. Maybe we just need to add this language into that vulnerability assessment area. What do folks think about that?
I think you've done that in other areas, Marian, like citing an example, maybe it's just as a reference, just as a way to kind of split the baby.
Yeah, so Erica, if you scroll up just a bit to pathway 1, strategy 2, action 11, so keep going just a little bit. Yeah, there we go. So this new language is develop a toolkit incorporating new and existing tools such as the AOT repeat flood damage inventory tool for vulnerability assessments, resilience planning, and response planning that would help towns assess, identify priorities, and mitigate climate vulnerabilities such as heat, drought, flooding. We could do, impact to sugaring season. It seems a little out of line, but if we want to call it out, we could do it there.
Well, I mean, I think when we think about like how this plays out in terms of shortened sugaring seasons and the tools that are available to sugar makers to be able to be not only prepared for that, but to adapt to that new reality. That's where I think we can, there's the assessment, but then there's also, can we educate them more? Can we adapt practices in the sugar woods? Can we adapt our practices for boiling? They're already doing that to some extent, but it's really, maybe there's a build out of the extension service that supports sugar makers. I don't know, but.
That would be different, I think, than what's identified here, because this is a toolkit for planning purposes, essentially, whereas I think what you're talking about is additional support to sugarers.
I'm sorry, I can't
adapt. So anyway, so if we think that sort of educational component is needed, that may be an additional action.
I like calling this out separately because it is in the it is in the law, and it seems like it's both these. There's 3 things: drought, less uncertain snowfall, which really isn't about sugaring, right? That's about probably the ski industry, maybe more than anything else. And then the sugaring season. And it's like, I don't think we don't really know like the extent of the adaptation that's necessary. And there's just a lot we don't know about those 3 areas. So I like the idea of keeping it separate because it's in the law, but also what Erica was saying about assessing it. And so maybe those 3 do sort of deserve being, they're a little bit different than the other threats that we've been living with and have our hands around a little bit better.
Okay, so Joe is suggesting keeping it as is. What do folks think?
Well, but focusing on assess.
On assessing, yeah.
Yeah.
Which I think that was the link. Well, it says identify and develop. So maybe it could be assess, identify and develop programs or something like that. So we could add assess there. Does that sound okay, Joe?
Marianne, I'll make changes in this document and
send it to me. Great. Okay. And I just want to stop for a second because Jane and I both have to leave early, and perhaps we could have an update from Jane on prioritization before her actual item on the agenda, so that you all can ask her questions if needed.
Yeah, we can do that.
It's okay.
Especially, we'll come back to this.
That's so nice. I was putting it in the chat. Maybe Mary saw it. I did not want to interrupt your good work, and I'm sorry to hop in late and have to go, but I was just recognizing that it might be hard to join in from the event that we have to go to. So briefly, just wanted to say that the formalizing of prioritization process has made good progress this week, and our intent is to roll out detailed timeline and guidance and templates on Monday to the 3 subcommittees expected to utilize it, you all, Ag and Eco, and Cross Sector. It has sort of solidified around the need to do a stepwise approach for prioritization, recognizing that we are excited, in case it isn't clear to you all, that we've hired Kaya Morris as our equity consultant to support subcommittees and ultimately the council in thinking about the application of the guiding principles and the scoring rubric. And so it's been clear that Kaya feels strongly that we can't actually review through the scoring rubric in a thoughtful way all the actions being considered by subcommittees. And so there's a recognition and appreciation that if we could prioritize in a stepwise manner based on impact, co-benefits, feasibility, and cost effectiveness, our highest priority actions, that then Kaya can support us in reviewing those for equity considerations for this first climate action plan and have a thought out implementation component about how we would advance the further advance the other actions that aren't reviewed now based on an implementation schedule for equity screening at a future time in a future iteration of a climate action plan. So that conversation started to unfold this week with the co-chairs present and orienting to Kaya and Kaya's thoughts for this. I think that we'll need to have a streamlined prioritization approach that gets us to having our actions screened for highest impact as soon as possible in the next couple of weeks. So I think October is going to be a busy month for prioritization, and hopefully further informed by Kaya's guidance, as well as, I'll just say, we have our first meeting on Monday with the counselors who stepped forward to help with thinking about process for CAP drafting and cross-cutting ideas and themes. And one of the things we'll test with them is our final guidance on prioritization that we'll send out at the end of that day on Monday. So, and Catherine Dimitrick has stepped up for to represent rural resilience. And I just recognize that all the counselors who have stepped up have varying abilities and capacity. And we really are going to hopefully have Catherine's support in the process and decision making, but know that others will lean in for drafting of those cross-cutting ideas and themes, and really know that Catherine's there to represent your work and how it's contributed in and how it's reflected in the CAP, I should say. So that's all I have to say, but happy to take any questions. And I, in my comment in the chat, suspect that next Friday that Kaya will join your subcommittee, and if there's room in the agenda that we could have a really substantive conversation about timeline, prioritization, and the role of equity screening.
I'm very excited to have Kaya on board with us. And, so welcome, Kaya, to the meeting here. I think next week it would probably be really helpful, because since October, we really need to launch into the prioritization work more substantively. If we can really walk through kind of step by step the 5 foundational criteria, how we can do a streamlined kind of yes, no run through, and then do prioritization with those. Just understanding step by step how we should approach each of these actions, knowing that the objective of that whole exercise is prioritization, meaning identifying which ones are actionable, ready to implement, that we can really launch into, identifying the ones that will be most impactful, like you said, and then thinking a lot about how we can portray cost effectiveness, because that is a hard task for rural resilience and adaptation, whereas there's a lot of science behind GHG emission reductions and the cost effectiveness of those. We're going to need to really be able to demonstrate the cost effectiveness of many of the actions we're putting forward. So if we can, that was a long-winded way of saying, if we can walk through that step by step next week, and then kind of give folks next steps on how to do that, that would be great.
Yeah, and I'll draw your attention, especially you, Erica, and other council members sitting on this subcommittee, that Science and Data was tasked with putting forward definitions, and I think that it'll be robust conversation at the council meeting about if they've done it well to reflect how to think about cost effectiveness and feasibility in the space of resilience, adaptation, and sequestration. It looks like Marion just dropped that in the chat, but those have been posted online and will be an action item on the council agendas next Tuesday.
Yeah, I looked at it quickly. I do have some, I mean, for later, I guess, but I do have some concerns how it's prioritizing, or at least my read, GHG emissions of all over other strategies. And it makes me think about, I just don't know where, I've lost track of it. We had talked at length about getting some kind of evidence to show how land use can reduce GHG emissions, and I haven't heard anything back. Is there any news there? I know Cadmus was working on it.
Yeah, they are still doing that work in the pathways modeling to the best of their ability, and that will be presented to the council on October 5th. And that's all of that work, that body of work for transportation, for buildings and thermal, non-energy, and electricity. So that work will be presented. So I encourage you to be there and ask questions. And then also, it's a good reminder, we put in our budget, Chris, this is, I guess, good to talk about here as any time. We do have in our budget work to advance in the Global Warming Solutions Act budget, I should say, around further technical analysis of smart growth study. And as you know, we've talked about scale and scope of that and when the right timing was for that. So we've done our best to reflect the reduced VMT that we get through land use in our current modeling, but know that we can do better. And that is further conversation with you and Joe Sagali and others who were part of that conversation originally. But we do have some money in our budget to advance that.
Great.
Any other questions?
And Chris, sorry, I was just also going to say that, the other thing that stalled, it feels like, is conversation around cross-cutting themes and land use being for a center around that. And I'm really hopeful that after Monday's meeting with the counselors who have stepped forward, we'll have a clear process for how we advance land use in the drafting for the CAP.
Great.
Any other questions about prioritization and where we'll be going with that?
One more on the cross-cutting thing. I'm just presuming our guidance is to do the analysis on the actions we have now and then work to resolve them with other committees later, or what's the timeline? How's that going to work?
Yeah, I hope to have clarity on that from Monday's meeting based on how we're going to do that.
Okay, that's good.
And just, I'll respond to Mike's question real quick in the chat. I see, we've had 3 public engagement events so far. Thank you to Mike and Marion and others who have participated in them. It's been great. And yeah, Mike was at our liveliest one on Wednesday in Dorset, which is great. And I will say that they are scheduled to present the synopsis, the summary of all of that engagement to the October 12th council meeting. So and then I expect that not only will they being the consultants, go to the council, but hopefully present detailed feedback around themes that they heard related to your work at a subcommittee level as well.
And then just to follow up on that, I was writing in the chat, I know Mike's question was about the broad public events, but for the rural community stakeholder event, Catherine Morris sent a summary sort of draft document to Catherine and Erica, just flagging it for you, Erica, to take a look at and see if you want more or less detail in there, but we can share that with the subcommittee as soon as you guys are good with that. So that should be in your inbox.
Yep. On the definitions for prioritization for those criteria, is the opportunity to comment on those the Tuesday council meeting? Okay.
Yeah.
So I would encourage everybody to take a look at those from and please, if you have comments or something that you'd like me to bring to the council, if you're not a council member, send me an email.
Yeah, I think if you all have time today to talk about them a bit, having a kind of concise comment from the full subcommittee, I think would be pretty powerful. if Erica or Catherine can bring it on Tuesday.
Yeah.
Yeah, great.
Thanks for that distraction, everybody.
Yeah, sorry.
And thanks for your work here. Yeah.
Thanks, Jane. Okay, well, let's go back to our summary of changes here. So the quick update I made to this action was to add the word assess to identify and develop necessary programs to address threats posed by drought, less uncertain snowfall, and shorter irregular sugaring seasons. Does that meet the mail?
Good enough for now.
Jay did recommend just getting rid of the word irregular.
Yeah, sugaring isn't irregular by its normality, just freezing thaw cycles. So shortening of the season, I think, suffices, or maybe adding the word just less reliable in that place would be my recommendation.
I like less reliable.
You can't even count on maple syrup anymore.
I am interested to see how our rainfall this year will affect next year's season. Last season really was impacted by the previous year's lack of rainfall, for sure. Speaking from somebody who has a sugaring operation in her family for 100 years. Okay, so are we all set with this? We'll just go to the highlighted ones here, Marianne. Okay, great.
Yeah, so this next one, Catherine Dimitrick had a comment that she recalls some action about remote work specific for municipalities and couldn't quite remember what the action was. And I wanted to flag it to see if anyone else remembered that and if we wanted to add it as a new action. We have something about remote work in general, but I don't know if there was a specific one around municipalities that people remember.
Why would there be one specific to municipalities?
I don't know.
This, I mean, the one, if you look at P1 S5A19, which this one was moved under strategy 5. Sorry, yeah. I mean, this language around requiring remote meeting options for all meetings of public bodies, I think addresses municipalities as well as many other levels of government.
Yeah, because if I remember it correctly, it was about people's time, not only carbon, but maybe more people would get involved if I am remembering that conversation a little bit.
So it's not about remote work of municipal employees. It's about participation in boards and commissions, public meetings, all that stuff.
That was my recollection of the emphasis. I don't remember anything particular calling out municipally remote work for municipalities.
Okay, yeah, great. I wasn't sure, so I didn't want to get rid of Catherine's comment.
It begs the whole broadband question, but we have that addressed under infrastructure.
Right.
Yep. And just as a reminder, the strategy language associated with this action to where it was moved to was increase community participation in local governance and support civic engagement and citizen involvement. So it is really related. It's drawing directly to that. Okay, so we're good with that. Sounds like. Okay. Let's see. Do we need to address the comments or just the highlighted?
Yeah, I would actually, let's look at this one. I didn't highlight this one, but Catherine was asking, does this include public costs such as FEMA money after declared disasters, or does section 248 need to be amended to account for this?
I think our section 248 experts are not here. I don't know.
Yeah, I would say this wouldn't include 248 projects. I think this is more the rural infrastructure that feeds local towns, especially since I was part of writing it, relocating lines underground and other options like that. We were talking about more the lines that go out a lot during events when they get rebuilt. I think
Yes.
248's a different. There's Ann.
Hi. So some of it will fall under Act 250, and some of it will fall under Section 248. I think it depends on the particular project, but to the extent it's covered under Section 248, the economic benefit and the need, the cost effectiveness are sort of encompassed in those criterion. So that's sort of a core function of Section 248 is to look at cost effectiveness and alternatives, least cost alternatives, least cost planning. The utilities integrated resource plan has to look at least cost planning. The investment under 248 has to be consistent with the utilities integrated resource plan. So the extent this touches on anything in 248, cost effectiveness is covered.
This has been to Catherine's question. I don't know whether the cost reference includes public costs, that is to say federal costs borne by FEMA mitigation projects. Those are certainly part of the solution to this, but only in instances where it's cost effective to the federal government. So I think the answer is no, but any federal money we get through FEMA for hardening lines is going to be cost effective.
I don't read this as, and maybe I'm just not informed enough about this, but when I read this as most appropriate, replaced with most appropriate resilient alternatives where cost effective, I read that as where cost effective to the utility doing the replacement or the infrastructure operator doing the replacement. I don't read that as to the public.
In the Section 248 context, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to make sure we understand the intent of this action.
Yeah, I came at it when developing this recommendation from the ratepayer advocate perspective. So it would be not necessarily to society at large, but to the ratepayers at large, the ratepayers of that particular utility making that investment.
Should we be specific about that in this action? To say we're cost effective to ratepayers? Yeah,
I think that's certainly where I would advocate from. I think that's a bigger question around cost effectiveness for probably the whole climate council, which cost effectiveness test is most important in which context. We tend to look at the utility cost test or the ratepayer impact test, but there's also a societal benefit test. And I think I would advocate for leaving this broad enough that any one of those tests could be applied as necessary or applicable.
Okay. Is there a parenthetical that could be you put in here so to make it clear? Can you list those tests again, Ann?
You could say, for example, to individuals, ratepayers, or society.
Thank you for adding customers.
Yeah. Does that clarify things for folks? Okay, sounds like it does. Can we move on? Okay, so there's some other comments here. Hold on.
Yeah, you can skip that one. It was just a comment.
And this one?
We need to figure out how best to share these actions with agriculture and ecosystems. They're flagged pretty clearly in the spreadsheet that's online and the spreadsheet that was shared with the full council. I think if this subcommittee is comfortable with it, I can take those specific actions and send it to them and ask them to send any actions that they think rural resilience to take a look at, so we could at least prepare for a meeting whenever that's scheduled or can happen, to review those actions together, because there's a lot of crossover. But flagging it, and Catherine flagged it as well, because it seems to be all of the actions under the support forest pattern strategy.
You know, I do see some actions in here that are more in the municipal realm, like increased funding for stormwater systems and green infrastructure, revising stormwater permitting. At the end of the day, it's most important what goes in the plan. So to ensure that these are reflected in some way, whether it's from Agnico or from us in the plan, is what's most important, I think.
Well, I think so. The ones you're talking about, that's under strategy 2. That's not forest pattern. So
yep, you're right.
This chart is only tracking where I made changes. So I made changes as we discussed at our last meeting about sort of changing from support forest pattern to support forest pattern to protect infrastructure and compact settlements. So, but it's all of the actions, and that's how I flagged it, is to share that in ecosystems. So I don't know if we need to talk about it right now. It's not super pertinent to the conversation at the Climate Council on Tuesday, although it may come up, but understanding that a lot of these cross over very closely with the work that they're doing. So we should share it with them.
Yeah, I thought we were more or less in agreement about that last time. And I thought Jens Jens recommended this as well. So we're just waiting to have the conversation.
Okay. Joe has a question.
Hey, yeah, just a question. I'm just wondering, when the plan is pulled together, it's not going to be, or is it going to be organized around, here are the pathways and strategies and actions of the different subcommittees, or is it just going to be all consolidated into, one list of pathways? And so it just seems, and I think you're nodding yes to that, which means it just makes sense that these will get consolidated in some efficient way at some point, right?
Yep, we just have to find the best way to do that. So
yeah, I don't think listing anything twice is a good idea. So we need to let go of our little parochial subcommittees and let our ideas float out.
Yeah, well, you want to make sure that at the end of the day, like, something that's important to you does get in the final.
Yep.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah, and you're right, Joe. It's not going to say like this pathway came from this subcommittee. That's not how it's laid out. So.
I mean, it seems like for now it's better to keep it on there, and obviously, and not.
Yeah. No, I'm not suggesting you remove it. I just wanted to flag it.
And I assume you got whoever's doing. I know that's a big question too, all the drafting, but someone is going to have to. That can't be done by committee. Someone's going to have to mush it all together and make it efficient.
Well, and that's a lot of what Jane identified for that cross-cutting issues group. Likely they will be talking about land use, which is a lot related to forest pattern, and understanding that a lot of the subcommittees have a lot of interest in helping draft that section. So that's what that group is going to talk about. And Catherine Dimitrick is sitting on that. So.
To a deeper question that I'm kind of thinking of when I'm listening to Joe now, like the action we were just talking about with the communication and electrical infrastructure. I mean, once these things are accepted and decided to move forward, I mean, somebody's still going to have to put meat to the bone of what that actually means, right? So these are still pretty high level actions, is my point.
So we talked about this a little bit in the last meeting, and this is where what Jane referred to as the group of folks that's coming together to develop the process or to further develop the process for the CAP planning and actually drafting. We will have some writing to do, and I offered to do some writing. We'll likely be doing some heavy editing here by email or as a group to our specific sections of the CAP to make sure that these themes are accurately accurately portrayed in the CAP.
Okay.
Why don't we go to comments left unaddressed? So pathway 4, strategy 3, action 31. Just as a reminder, that strategy.
Pathway 4, I think you're under pathway 3 right now.
Yep.
Yeah, so this is about land use, and Catherine's question was, is this better suited under pathway 2, which is focused on infrastructure?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris, I think.
I struggle with where some of these things should land in the end too. So I don't have any clear answer.
So
it could also go under pathway 3, which is about reducing municipal fossil fuel
Yeah.
use.
what do folks think about that? Like that idea?
Yeah, it's not really an infrastructure.
Not about building resilience in infrastructure.
Yeah.
I mean, that might be a co-benefits, but that's not its primary intent.
Yeah, so if folks want to move it to pathway 3,
My take on it is this is definitely a land use issue. I mean, the municipal septic is really key to whether there's sprawl in the community or not, and whether we can have vibrant village centers. So for me, this infrastructure is critical to land use planning.
Let's make sure that the intent here is really clear, though, as a group here, because as I read this, that does not come through as as being applicable to land use planning.
No, this seems to me is efficiency and energy reduction is the way I read it.
yeah, I agree with Jens that the water and wastewater is really important for compact settlement design, but this is talking about energy audits. So it's, to me, speaks more to reduction in energy use.
I mean, you could even lump it into its, assessment tool, looking at, if you wanted to, I mean, it could live in any number of places.
Well, let's see is there, under pathway 4, and I'm looking to you, Chris, is there anything related to land use as it relates to, siting wastewater?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. There's a whole, yeah.
I thought I read that. So that may already be covered, is what I'm saying in pathway 4.
I guess this is talking about the efficiency of the facility, is my read on it,
Energy consumption, right?
Yeah, it's talking about do you have energy efficient pumps? Is your process energy efficient? It's not really talking about supporting other goals. It's just wringing some efficiency out of the systems and the system itself, is my read.
Right. So here this is in pathway 4. Strategy 2 is increase investment in infrastructure needed to support compact walkable development that is more resilient to climate disruptions. And I think there are actions under here about land use for. So let's just double check that that's in there. And otherwise, it seems like that action would probably belong under pathway 3 as it relates to greenhouse gas emissions and energy reduction. Is everybody okay with that? I mean, pathway 2. Let's make sure I'm right here.
It could be 2 or 3. So I don't know how much.
Well,
if the juice is worth the squeeze on this one.
Pathway 3 is about greenhouse gas emission amongst municipalities.
Right.
So
it would be 3 if it was run by diesel pumps.
Come on, somebody give me the answer. Right, but I mean, again, these are going to have to be consolidated in some way. So we may not want to argue about this for too long. It goes under pathway 3 for municipal energy reduction.
That's where I think it should be. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Next one. So all water utilities.
So Catherine was noting that, Chris did a great job reaching out to the water and wastewater folks at DEC to get a number of actions. So we do have a lot under the land use section about water and wastewater. And I didn't look too closely at this, but Catherine said that we still have nothing about expanding water and wastewater capacity to support compact settlement. So she's suggesting this in the next action. Then she says, suggest this in the next action do not necessarily belong in our land use pathway. I'm not quite sure what she means by that, but Chris, do you know if there's anything about expanding water and wastewater for to support compact settlement? Basically,
yeah, I mean, to me, generally, yeah, the infrastructure investment is to support, more.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what she's talking about is regional, inter-town connections and opportunities to share water supplies and treatment here. So it's a little bit of a different thing.
Mm-hmm.
Joe, I know you got something to say.
Well, I'm just thinking about water and wastewater infrastructure and, our compact centers, which really shouldn't be next to each other. So what does that mean? Maybe regionalization doesn't mean actually the physical connection of the infrastructure. Maybe it means something else, whether it's operational or, because they're not going to have, or even there might be limitations in, especially in the small communities, the staff that can actually manage those kinds of systems. I mean, most of public works are really road crew folks. And so it's this different set of skill set, managing water and wastewater. So I'm just curious if that's kind of, because obviously they're not connected. If they're connected, that doesn't really, that could facilitate the problem, not.
That's a good point. I mean, especially if you have a decentralized system that requires ongoing maintenance, is there a regional approach to that? But we can put a pin in this one and I can work on it some more. And does that make sense for now, just to keep us, I know you've got somewhere you've got to be, so I'm just trying to get us through.
Yeah, because I wonder,
leave when I have to leave, so.
I wondered if they were talking about, so Shelburne, South Burlington share facilities with Champlain Water. So there is actually some areas that share facilities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In terms of the intent of the group, is our intent to encourage this type of activity, or is the intent not to encourage this type of activity?
It's not clear to me what Catherine's intent was, or what the question is. So that's why I kind of want to do a little bit more work around kind of what is meant by this. It's just, it could go different. It could be interpreted differently.
Okay. All right. Oh, okay. So Catherine was saying, not sure how to word it. We should have some action about heat islands and how to ensure new development is designed in a way to reduce heat islands and retrofit and improve existing neighborhoods to reduce heat islands.
This
think about that.
Well, I think we kind of addressed this. There's a broad kind of chapter 117 change that talks about energy, siting and locating buildings to reduce the effects of heat. And then there's also some more broader strategies about, ways to, for example, to plant trees to reduce heat in areas. So I think it's maybe caught or addressed indirectly in other sections.
Let's, why don't we double check that?
Yeah.
Do folks feel like if that's not adequately addressed, that heat islands is something that we want to make sure is addressed in our suite of action somewhere?
Yeah, I think that's what I'm saying. It is addressed elsewhere. So it hasn't been overlooked, and it could have been overlooked by Catherine.
But Chris, would you mind just double checking words, and we may just need to really just put the words heat islands in there. Just to be really clear about the intent.
Yep.
Okay.
On this one, there's just a policy disagreement, but there's no, just kind of is what it is.
Let's have a discussion. So eliminate Act 250 agricultural soil mitigation fees for housing in areas served by municipal sewer and water. I know nothing about this, so let's have a discussion.
How do I even start? So, you know, oftentimes to develop a sewer and water system, an in-ground system, you are often putting these in farm fields or soils that perk. And if they're of a certain size, you have to pay an Act 250 ag soil mitigation fee. This is a modification of policies to reduce the cost of infrastructure for rural areas. It's not a significant reduction in cost, but it really depends on the cost of the ag soils in the community where these systems are being developed. There's nuances of this, I think, in other actions that maybe narrow this down a little bit. I think on this one too, it may make sense to just let me dig into it and look at the other. There is another ag soil exemption proposal action in there and make sure that those two come together. These are all kind of lumped under a generic kind of act. These are Act 250 related things, so that we may just have a broad strategy of Act 250 actions. And that is going to, I think, have a connection to ag and eco.
Yeah, I was just going to flag, they were just talking about today that they have a number of Act 250 actions that they need to group together. So it might be beneficial to have ours grouped together and then be able to compare and share with ag and eco.
Yeah, we have another one in the utility area in Pathway 2 as well that talks about Act 250. So if we are going to lump them all together.
It's a popular topic.
Okay. Pathway 5, ensure CSM is covering rural transportation, public transit. There's no comment related to this one, Marian. Is this,
it's just a note. So I just left it for my reference. I have to go back. I haven't had time to do this yet. Actually look in detail at cross-sector mitigations recommendations. They were just still working on finalizing them this week. So I'm fairly certain they cover rural transportation and public transit, but it was so that we didn't cover it as much in Pathway 5.
Okay. Right.
Yeah, I brought that up at the last meeting because it showed up in our small group.
Right. Yeah, I'm fairly certain they are, but I can't pull out the specific actions because they haven't finalized their work yet. But I'll leave it as a note for myself to check.
Next, Pathway 5, new construction and rehab.
Yeah, so there was a suggestion. So there was a comment to combine this action to address energy efficiency upgrades. When we did that, though, there's a sentence in sort of the original that talks about significant new funding available for housing post-pandemic. And by doing that combination, we sort of lose that idea. And I was wondering if the subcommittee thinks we need a specific action around funding for housing recovery post-pandemic, because that's different than the combination of actions that was suggested by someone. So I don't want to lose that if someone thought that needed to be an action. But if it does, we'll have to make a new one.
I think there's going to be a lot of housing investment post-pandemic or not, because there's money to invest in housing. So I don't know if it's necessary.
Yeah, so taking out significant new funding available for housing recovery post-pandemic wouldn't hurt that first sentence, which is related to higher. I mean, it's what it's communicating is still clear.
Yeah, well, what I'm saying is that that first sentence was combined with another action because it was really similar to one we already had. But by combining, we lost that sentence about funding for housing post-pandemic. So my question is, do we want to add something about housing recovery funds post-pandemic back in?
Oh, and I think I heard
It didn't
Chris-
have anything to do with
Already.
energy efficiency upgrades.
Yeah. And I think I heard Chris say that's kind of already underway.
So if you feel that way, then maybe we don't need something about it.
I'm not sure how you want me to capture that here. Just leave the action as it is, or take out this.
I think you can just drop that last sentence. Yeah.
Yeah, that's already not in there anymore. That's the old action. So you don't
Right.
really need to change anything.
Okay. Got it. So next one is a question under pathway 2, strategy 3.
This is the one we hit a while ago, isn't it?
Oh yes, that was the comment that was up above.
Great.
So I think we resolved that.
Duplicate. Great.
Awesome. So the process for this, Marion, is I'll send you these notes, and then you can make the updates to the actions matrix with those changes. Okay.
Yep. Yeah. If you send me that, that'd be great.
Will do.
I've got my homework assignments. We'll get it done.
Great. Okay, so now that we've gone through summary of changes, I hesitate to do this. I think it would be helpful just to hear from the group to quickly go through our pathways, look at the strategies, make sure you're conveying to me what the really the top themes that we should be communicating to the council are as it relates to each of those pathways. I mean, we've got our strategies. Are there really impactful actions that you want us to talk about and have discussed, or do we need guidance from the council on any of them? This is where I'm not going to share my screen because it will not be big enough for you.
I think just keeping in mind, and if there are strategies that are straightforward and all of the actions don't seem controversial, and like there's nothing that you want to address with the council, you don't have to share an action for each strategy. I think just keep in mind, Erica, that you all have, I think it's 55 minutes on the agenda to do a presentation and to receive comment from the council. I think you're right. What you have right now is a lot. So I think it will be helpful, as you said, to hear from folks about, are there specific actions that we've had a lot of discussion about in our meetings that we think would be helpful to convey where we landed in that discussion to the council, or things that we want feedback from the council on about specific programs or funding opportunities or changes to policy that we're suggesting. So yeah.
This is all with the lens of we may be, especially when we get into the prioritization realm, we really want to flag things that are as impactful as reducing greenhouse gas emissions, if not maybe even more impactful. So that's really where I'm getting at here.
Can I start?
Absolutely.
I do think that, and even a few of us sat in on the House Energy and Innovation Committee meeting 2 or 3 weeks ago, where I think I said to this team already, where they said, well, where's the now? And I do think that we do need to put some emphasis on becoming more resilient with our existing infrastructure and learn to live with the changing climate. Because I don't think it's suddenly going to become less than it already is. And what it already is more than some of the infrastructure can handle. So I do think that it's as important to become resilient with our existing infrastructure as it is to reduce greenhouse gases. So I think that's we need to do both.
I would wholeheartedly agree. I think too much emphasis on just meeting. We need to meet the emissions goals, but Vermont's total emissions compared to what other countries and nations do is pretty small, and we're going to be impacted more significantly by the emissions of those other countries and what that's going to do to our climate change. So I think we need to do both, and I think overemphasis on emissions reductions kind of is not the best investment to protect our communities and economy.
I would suggest that the state land use plan is likely to be controversial and is, in my opinion, one of the most significant changes we could make as a state to address climate change.
Keep them coming. Great, really good. I'm making 100 notes here, so.
Are you looking for like Chris and Mike sort of had a big, broad kind of thought to it, and Jens has a very focused one as well. I mean, if you want another focused one, and this is specific to transportation, but it's really establishing a transportation flood resilience program, which the timing is perfect for that because the Federal Reauthorization Act, which is part of the big infrastructure bill, it's included in that. So it's a huge opportunity to have some money to be proactive about transportation flood resilience overall. But we can focus it where we want to focus it. So to me, like, that's a very actionable, realistic thing that we can accomplish.
Joe, it makes me think of all the tools we've talked about to decide where we're vulnerable or not. And even in transportation, I assume you're not worried about South Burlington, right? So I think a lot of the tools we have will maybe help focus the resiliency conversation on the areas we need to become more resilient. Just a thought there. And it's really the same for energy, communications, and transportation. There's areas where we know we're already feeling the effects, and there's areas we're not. So I think that's kind of built into what we're talking about, but I still wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, well, from my perspective, that feeds into developing the program, right? Is knowing it's about identifying, which we've talked about a lot, identifying vulnerabilities, ranking them, and investing where you get, where the threats are greatest and the consequences are greatest, right? If you don't deal with it. Yeah. And that's maybe another overarching thing. I'm not sure every sector is on a level playing field with that yet, right? That that all sectors really understand what all the threats are and the impacts, and have vulnerability assessments and everything else. So if you're looking for like a big gap, I think that's sort of my observation. And I think we have some actions around that in this.
We do.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my my soapbox is we're going to electrify everything. We need to electrify everything. And that's going to be the most cost-effective way to power our economy, in the future. Whether that's 5 years, 10 years, 15 years down the road, it's coming. So it's all about the grid, and how do we make the grid more resilient while at the same time more effective for the entire state. And I think that if we don't have the grid of the future, we're going to lose out economically, we're going to lose out environmentally, and yeah, we're going to lose out to other states and regions of the country that do that. So yeah. So and again, we have this once in a generation opportunity to secure funding to do that. So I think we've got to, we as a state need to be ready to grab as much of that federal dough as we can as it relates to the grid.
Did we identify an action under, I think it was passed by 2 for the infrastructure piece around grid resilience? I think we did. I just want to, there's so many, it's hard for me to remember.
Yeah,
I think there's 2 or 3 in there for different aspects of the grid. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Okay. I mean, that's a good way to roll it up, though, because there are 2 or 3 actions in there that are important to speak to that point.
Yeah. If you could call it grab the dough, that'd be great.
Maybe we're
working on it.
That brought a smile to my face as well.
Yeah, your team has been really helpful, Mike, Liz and Josh and others. So yeah, absolutely.
I'll just put that as the lead slide in the presentation.
It's free dough for us. It's not free. Nothing's free, but.
Anne.
Thanks. Just goes to Chad's point in terms of getting to the grid of the future and some win-win-wins in terms of hitting the checkbox of reducing fossil fuel emissions, but also grid resilience. We have some foundational pieces there in Pathway 2. Specifically, we're talking about the foundational technology so we can deploy all the electric vehicles and the heat pumps and make sure that we have, that we're using those to efficiently make use of the grid, right? So we need to have the communications to and from those resources, which we talk about. We need to have that's the sort of broadband everywhere. I think that checks a lot of boxes, and also the information and operational technology to, really dispatch all those resources in an orchestrated way. So we talk about that in our deploy foundational technology pathway. That's really should help hit a lot of the different aims of this work.
Thanks, Anne. Ben.
Hello. Two things. First, I see that Kaya Morris has joined us. Kaya? So
Ben, you missed that. We said hello and
I missed that. Oh,
you're way behind.
Okay. Well, my other one maybe is equally off the mark, but I'm not sure how this fits in terms of prioritizing specific actions or even strategies, but something has occurred to me during the conversation today that I want to throw out there, and maybe this is useful in preamble presentation or such. We have talked a lot over the course of our meetings about unfragmented habitat, about species migration, about intact forest, even about ecosystem services. But as the Rural Resilience Working Group, things that we have not talked about, maybe ever, are sense of place, beauty, tourism economy, and the thing that I want to offer is that when we're talking about electrifying and localizing our energy supply, Vermont has a pretty mediocre wind resource, for example. It's not a great wind resource compared to a lot of places, and to really tap it, we need to go into some of our most fragile ecosystems. However, what we do have is 9.5 million acres of relatively unfragmented, recovering, mixed northern hardwood forest, which allows for species migration. We actually have a world-class climate adaptation resource. And we need to prioritize that and recognize that even today, people come from all over the world to see the land use pattern and the resilient, comforting human landscape of Vermont. That premium is going to increase with climate change.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you.
Erica, if you need more specifics, those initial slides that we put together, I don't know, a few weeks ago, kind of called out, what I thought were controversial actions in our pathways. So I think that may be helpful.
Can you resend that to me, Chris?
Yep.
Thank you. I think, from the emergency management perspective, one thing, these are all really excellent points, and I will be sure that we are conveying them as we go through our presentation, because they're roll-ups of why these actions are so important. And so, but I think from an emergency management perspective, getting people out of harm's way is one of the very important ways that we can continue to build resilience and adapt to a changing climate that is not just going to change back. It's not a very technical way of saying that, but so just highlighting Mike's point about that, and highlighting the importance of a state-funded program to be able to do that, so that we're not always at the whim and mercy of the federal government to be able to do that. If we really want to do that and get people out of harm's way, then we need to put state-level investment into that. Ben's clapping. Jay.
Yeah, I just want to echo the grid and the importance of reliability on the grid and all the different ways we can get hit hard on the grid. You know, I see that firsthand as a kind of a first responder to weather on the grid, and just making sure that we're being as smart as we can be. And then I guess the other side of this is our climate tech economy, I would say, and positioning ourselves for another way of saying this, maybe the new carbon economy, and investing in aspects of that could also make us a leader there. And there's some of that happens organically, but doubling down on that economic opportunity, I think for us is huge. And then my kind of pie on the sky thing is carbon removal. And thinking about carbon removal, natural systems, we know do a lot of this, but maybe be more deliberate about some of those carbon removal technologies to enable some of that as that comes online in the next decade or so.
Yeah, that's a huge market opportunity, Jay. You know, it's like green hydrogen and then carbon capture. But again, going to require a ton of energy to do that and electricity. So if we don't have the grid that can support all of that, because that's local, right? That is going to happen here. We're not going to be able to capitalize on that massive economic shift that's coming.
Any other high-level themes that we want to be sure are communicated? There's a lot here, and this is a great roll-up of, this is like a cheerleading opportunity for all of us and all the work that you have done. So
one more thing, Jay and Chad reminded me of this, and it came up again at the public meeting on Wednesday night. Just any thoughts or conversation on climate migration. Just about every single table there had mentioned that. And I just don't know if there's, you know, again, you can't prepare for things not knowing they're going to happen. I know that's hard to do, but just, it seems like everyone's convinced that Vermont is going to be a safe haven at some point, and just, I don't know if there's an action for that, but more just to make sure we talk about it.
I think,
population
growth.
Yeah.
I think we have several actions related to that in the way that we grow to accommodate that, as well as building resiliency into our infrastructure to be able to accommodate that.
Yeah, because I worry some don't want that growth, and I'm not sure that's, yeah.
We don't call out climate migration specifically, I don't think, in any of the strategies or actions.
We had one somewhere along the line here. Did it fall off the radar?
I may have to double check, but I'm not seeing it jump out at me.
I'd say that's central to the land use planning strategies, that we're not leaving it up to folks who are just moving here what our development pattern is going to look like. We're going to exercise some control over that development pattern so that we can maintain our forest structure and maintain these ecosystem services.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting you bring that up, Mike. I think we're already seeing like COVID migration. I had a meeting yesterday with a guy who runs a solar business in West Virginia, but he and his family moved back to Vermont because they didn't feel safe down in a state that has like a 40% vaccination rate. So I think the same is going to be true as we see the rise of sort of autocratic, authoritarian kind of governing in certain parts of our country. We're going to see all kinds of population.
The political refugees.
Political, COVID, climate. Yeah, roll it all into just population growth.
Yeah. No, I mean, I do think the internet broadband that we're deploying now is going to make a lot of things possible as far as people moving to the state that never would have, because they can actually work here now. Jobs were a real limiting factor. So, and I think that COVID showed us we really weren't ready for that kind of change and welcoming these new residents to our state. So I think we do need to get ahead of that. The other thing, just, you know, I feel like, you know, there's a big emphasis on electrifying everything, but I guess a point I'd like to make is, you know, our infrastructure investments that we make now we live with them for hundreds of years, or probably even more. And if we want to change the system, for example, just electrifying our fleet, it kind of misses an opportunity to kind of, how do we change our land use patterns to be more efficient, less consumptive, and support overall energy reduction in the long term. My concern is that if we just rush to electrify everything and go back to business as usual, we've missed a big opportunity to make the state stronger and more sustainable.
Yeah, it seems to be, Chris, to be a both and there.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I just want to note that we've pretty much covered all of our agenda items. And so when we did talk about process for prioritizing subcommittee actions, we're going to get into more detail about that next meeting. And that's going to be really important because it's going to require some task group level work in October. And then Jane also talk to us about the framework of that prioritization. So as it relates to reviewing the draft presentation for the VCC, this is really what I wanted to get to, because there's a lot. I was putting together the slides yesterday, and I think there's like 35 slides. It's asinine.
Yeah, don't do that.
I can't do it. So this is really helpful to really just kind of ground us and make sure those top level messages are conveyed to the council. And this is absolutely very helpful. Are there any? I don't know. Do we have any? First, let me round out. Are there any, closing comments or final comments from the subcommittee about any of the things we talked about today? Questions? Are there members of the public that would like to provide comment? Okay. I think we've reached the end of our agenda, and I think we have like 40 minutes of found time.
No, let's keep on talking.
No, okay. It's been an excellent discussion. All right, with that, enjoy your weekend, everybody.
Thanks.
See you next week.
Thanks, everybody.